Hello, 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 and welcome to Drew's Book Reviews. This is your opportunity to hear a conversation with Anonymous, author of The Wars of Wrath. I am also joined here by Nico from Nico's Book Reviews. So it's going to be a fun conversation, and thank you so much for joining us. Or if you're watching on the replay, of course, thanks so much for watching on the replay. So this is going to be a lot of fun. If you haven't read The Wars of Wrath yet, I highly recommend you go and check it out. In fact, if you're here in the live stream today and I see your name on the chat, you're going to have the opportunity to check out the Wars of Wrath for absolutely free just by being here. I see your name in the chat. Your name is automatically going to be entered into a random draw at the end of the stream to win a free copy of Gurzil on Audible audiobook, Compliments of Anonymous. So if you're here, congratulations. Your name's already in the draw. So first of all, Nico, thank you also for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to Nico, go ahead and do so. He's another awesome booktuber.
I'm okay, I guess.
No, you're awesome.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for joining us, Anonymous. It's awesome to have you on the channel. So I really appreciate you joining us.
No, I'm very glad to be here. Obviously, you guys are two of the most interesting booktubers that I have actually run into in this endeavor. I've met a number of them, but there's actually only like 5 or 6. For the first time when I started, I went log. Let's find all the booktubers, but I kind of narrowed it down to at this point. I think I only follow like about 7 or 8 of them, and certainly you, Drew, and Nico are both still one of those people, just because I just enjoy what you have to say about books.
Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate that. I follow too many booktubers. Sometimes I think I get honestly, I feel like I get 10 hours of notifications a day. There's no way I'm ever going to be able to watch them all.
Yeah, no, can't be done.
I'm so unbelievably behind as well. So, yeah.
I've had to accept I'm only going to get to watch 1 or 2 videos a day. So I have to be a little more selective on which ones I actually get to. But with regard to the giveaway contest, just before we get into a discussion about the books, what I'd like to do is we're just going to play a sample of the audiobook for you to hear, so you know what you're in for and what you could possibly win. So just give me a moment to get that up on the screen here. And we'll listen to a short sample of the audiobook.
And be very frightened.
Yes, be frightened, be afraid.
As Alba opened the massive door to the temple, he was struck by the putrid smell of death. I wondered when you would come, a voice hissed in the darkness. In the years since the cult had taken up residence in his city, Alba had heard and seen many strange things. Voices behind the smoke, figures in the shadows, the sound of drums over the sands. There had been times he had even thought that perhaps the dragon Gurzil might be real. Other times he was almost certain that it was all just a con. But nothing could have prepared Alba for what he saw as the smoke cleared. There, before him, was a giant that defied the human experience to describe. The monster was covered in hard red scales and horns. It stood at least 3 ells high, so that even the massive domed temple seemed inadequate for its size. Its claws and teeth were razor sharp and wet with blood. And below its massive head lay the charred remains of human beings, piled like rubbish. You can't be real, Alba said, choking on the stench of burning flesh as he looked upon the impossible horror. Of course I am. All your senses tell you that I am. Even before you saw my glorious might, you knew me to be real. That is why it took you so long to find the courage to open that door. That is why you sent away my bride. The dragon hissed darkly as it circled him, moving with a speed that should have been impossible for something of its size. 5 years. 5 years I have been denied my bride. I could have continued to darken the sun and poison your waters, but instead I have indulged you. This only because I wanted my temple built. That was you? He asked, unable to move. Part of him still wanting to believe that it was all a dream, a trick. Of course it was me, the dragon hissed. Though, it did take quite a bit of effort. This is why I have been willing to wait, rest, and amuse myself in other ways, the creature said, moving over to a pile of gold and silver.
I think we're.
Looking around, Alba now realized that the massive circular room was full of treasure. There were piles of gold and diamonds, glittering in the dim light of the torches that illuminated the chamber. Among the gold were stacks of raw ivory tusks and reams of silk. In the center, stretched out over a pile of gold and gemstones, was a beautiful, slender young woman with long ice blonde hair, her Aryan tattoos bright on her light skin. Alba had been so stunned by the sight of the dragon that he had completely missed the woman half buried in the gold. A vandal, Alba said breathlessly, looking at the woman. You serve the Vandals? Well, the gods, how could he have been so blind? I serve no one! The dragon boomed, bringing itself to full height. She is nothing but a gift from one loyal to my ends. She is my pet. An attractive distraction that has proven more useful than originally expected, the dragon said, snaking its tail possessively around the woman with the lusty indifference with which a sultan would embrace a concubine.
And that's that.
Definitely an exciting scene to choose for a sample.
It was the good scene. It was probably one of the first ones I wrote. Yes, there was. Okay, we got some comments here though. Let's see what the comments say. Yes, there is a link to the book, I believe. Drew, you put the link on? Oh, I can't hear Drew.
Yeah, Drew, you're.
Drew, we can't hear you.
There we go. Yes,
Ah,
there's
There
a
we go.
link.
He's back. You had us very worried.
There is a link to the book, Amazon link to the book in the description. And also, Art, you have the opportunity to win a free copy of this audiobook as well, since you're here in the chat. So your name's already in the draw for that. So you never know. Maybe you'll win. But yeah, there's the sample of what you have to look forward to.
I don't know how Drew is going to get you the code. Basically, it's just a download code, and you're just going to literally hit the link. It sends you straight to Audible, and you just plug in the promo code like you would any kind of Amazon code, and it gives you the free audiobook.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could tell you, I haven't listened to the full audiobook yet, but I just recently downloaded it when my Audible annual subscription renewed, and I thought, okay, I've got to download this, use one of my credits for it. Well, one thing I was wanting to ask you was, so part of this book, and I just want to put this out here while we're watching, I have no idea where this discussion is going to go with this series. So there may or may not be spoilers. I think we'll all do our best to keep any spoilers light, so not too much detail. But you've been warned if you're watching this.
It's one of those books, even if you hear something, you're probably going to want to know more.
I think so, yeah.
it's one of those kind of series because a lot of the characters are characters, and that's the wonderful thing about writing, Arthurian fiction, is that you're taking characters that most people have some experience with, and you're just picking, and in many cases, you're making them your own, or you're picking and choosing how other others um, have shown it. But I will also comment on Jason Cross Reed's books. His comment there, which is, yeah, uh, my narrator is probably one of the best narrators I have ever come across. If anybody out there is looking for a narrator, I highly recommend you use Brian C. McKay. He just is that good a narrator. He is a pleasure to work with. And I'm going to give him that shout out here because I do know that he's working to establish himself more. And I honestly believe we need more audiobooks in this world that are narrated by him.
Well, just from that sample alone, yeah. I mean, I've been listening to audiobooks for a while, and that narration was just awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing the entire book.
Right.
Both books that are out right now, Badon Hill being the second book. Um, One thing I wanted to ask is why the Arthurian legend? So that is what this
Well,
historical fantasy focuses on.
so
There's so many.
so why the Arthurian fantasy? Well, King Arthur has always been one of my favorites. It's something that I read when I was a kid. I think I don't know if the kids book is over there. Knights of the Round Table, and then grow up in the '80s. You watch in the early 2000s. You watch Merlin and Monty Python, The Holy Grail, all of those kind of shows. And one of the earliest books I ever remember being read, I wasn't old enough to read it at the time, was Beowulf. So there's a lot in Arthur that you can do. And as I said, one of the great things about King Arthur is that there is no real canon to it. It's all legends. So you can pick and choose, well, I liked how Mallory portrayed this character. I liked how this character was portrayed. You could even decide things like in, Badon Hill, certainly. There's I liked how Monty Python portrayed that one. So we're going to go with that. And you can just pick and choose. And, obviously and you can kind of decide what, and you can just say that I'm going to look outside the trope, but I usually don't. I kind of say, this is everybody that, the Morgana from Merlin was everybody's favorite Morgana. Changing her just throws people off. Whereas there are actual characters that nobody has really accomplished the perfect one, like Guinevere. You can do anything you want with Guinevere because, frankly, no one's figured out how to do a Guinevere well. We're trying to portray. You have to try to put. It's a very. It actually began as just sort of writing prompts for me, because it's very hard to write Guinevere. How do you write a likable character that cheats on her husband with his best friend? How do you write that best friend and all of this? I will, however, now divert from that and say that I didn't start with the idea of King Arthur. That wasn't the original first draft I wrote of this. First draft I wrote of this was actually during the 3rd century, during the time when most sources believe that the actual St. George character lived. And he was still a Briton, and it involved much more the crisis of the 3rd century. But there wasn't as much interesting things going on until I got really a little bit further into the 6th century. And at that point, it's like, well, that's not where. Then, it involved a lot more moving into the Arthurian legend and what's going on in different places.
I was just saying, you touched on things that were going to be several of my questions actually in there, so it was a good part. And so I know you
And
branched a little.
to
Uh,
yes, that is what I describe him as. He is we will not use spoilers here, but in the Wars of Wrath, King Arthur is one of a couple of Romano British kings that are fighting a heavy Saxon incursion um, during this. And it's actually the main character, George, is a different king that doesn't necessarily get along with Arthur. But and we could have long arguments, and I've already done this in another interview where I had the long argument as to whether or not I believe King Arthur existed, and we're not going to do that here. That argument was already had. I explained that in detail, and it will take up the entire live stream like it did the last one.
it was a fun live stream though with that one. So
It really was. I
yeah.
enjoyed it, but we both know my hosts are looking at me like we know he could go on and on about this for like 3 hours.
Well, and so I was
Yeah.
going to ask, so with talking about like the idea of there not being a real canon with Arthur, and I know from talking to you and from the previous interview I saw with you on Liam's Lyceum's channel, you kind of touched on that and touched on how you can find in any adaptation that's using kind of the Arthurian base, you can find bits and pieces that you like. So, what was it like fitting those all into one story? And is there a particular aspect that either you were really proud of the way you repurposed or the way you added it into your own original story?
The piece I'm most proud of, you will not see until later, and
Oh,
that is
come on.
no. I have one that I'm most proud of, and no, you will not get it because it really
Okay, don't.
it's
There's a
probably
hook to
the
keep
only
by the
person.
series.
I will say this. There was one Arthurian scholar who, this isn't my theory, it belonged to somebody else, and he nearly cost him his career as a historian, and he then repurposed it into one of the greatest fantasy novels of all time. So we won't go. That will be my hint, and no one will get there. Um, One of the things that I really do enjoy doing, and I found quite interesting when I started delving into the history, was how much of a connection there was between what was happening in different parts of the world during the 6th century. You know, one of the things I put into, and this isn't really a spoiler because it's just a little tidbit I put in there. One of the things I put into there is the idea that the people in North Africa wouldn't have been would have had some experience with the Britons because the Britons were the primary fighting force that drove the Vandals into Africa in the first place. Like Constantine and all of his men were the ones that were pushing. So they would have known who these people were. This wouldn't have been like some far off and distant world. This would have been more like, and those were the people from Mordor. Even if you're living in the Shire, you still knew who Mordor was. There was a lot of movement going on in the 6th century. And one of the other things that, I've only just started tying in is the connection between the Byzantine courts and the Romano-Briton courts, which from archaeology and from various other aspects and from the contemporary writings and from legendary writings, we know there was a connection, but it's usually kind of dismissed. Most people that write about this time period see it as very insular, like people, but this isn't later dark. This isn't the 8th century, 9th century when the Vikings are sort of coming out, and most people haven't, left their village in 4 generations. At this point in time, you probably only lived in. You were probably no one was making big cities or anything like that. They weren't establishing castles. There was no expectation that you were going to still be there in 5 years.
Yeah,
Uh,
one thing I will say I really loved about this series is, I mean, there's historical fiction, and I kind of view this as historical fantasy. because with the legend of Gurzil, as well as other religious sects and denominations involved in this, and the different religious ideas, all kind of clashing in the Wars of Wrath. Essentially, I love the fact that in this world, in this legend retelling of this story that you've crafted, Gurzil isn't just a religious belief in this god Gurzil, but Gurzil is a real entity within this world with real magic and real powers. And that's kind of why I view it as historical fantasy versus just historical fiction. And that I love the dragon, by the way. We heard this in the sample clip at the beginning of the stream. I love the dragon and the way that's portrayed, especially with the audiobook narrator. So considering that this is an Arthurian legend retelling, there's a few different ways to go about that. One, of course, is just retelling the legend itself as a historical fiction. And then
Which
there's the
has
way
been
you're
done.
doing it, which is bringing magic into it and making these magical entities a very real part of the world. So you mentioned that's been done as far as just fiction, but I guess why one over the other? Any specific reason other than the historical fiction retelling has been done
Okay.
already that you chose the
We
magic?
got a couple questions here and a couple points I'll make.
Sure.
So the first, I'll answer the last question. The last question is, I think Chas put it best when he did, because right after I finished the book and right when I was publishing it, Chas did his review of The Winter King. And I wrote that, and one of the biggest criticisms he had for it that everybody, jumped in comments and agreed with, and I agree with because I read Winter King, it's almost exactly when it, a long time ago, but and recently I've read it since. But he said that the lack of magic, the lack of the classic narration in the Arthurian, all of that sort of mysticism and smoke and mirrors that we expect in King Arthur was missing from, the pure historical retellings. Certainly the Clive Owen movie. It's trying, but it's missing. You can't divulge it. And one of the things I thought would be very interesting when I started sort of writing the book in the first place was to look at it more, it more as how people would have viewed magic at that point in history. And I think the only way to explain it would be to compare it to how people in the Star Wars universe and Star Wars characters view the Force. Some see it as it's this major part of, it's this something that they wield, and they are they are Jedi and Sith, and they're, playing with lightsabers and zapping people with lightning and throwing people off buildings. Then there are people for whom it's a major form of their religious sense of self. And then there's characters who just completely believe that it's hogwash. Or if it's not hogwash, it's just tricks. So that's how most of my characters, I try to show them as this isn't, when they see magic, it isn't, okay, we're bored. And I think that's sort of almost key to any magic system that anyone writes is not so much what the magic is, but how do others perceive the magic? If you're looking at, sometimes it's magic is this thing that the elites have and they rule over everybody else. Other times it's this aspect of, mages are heavily oppressed, and we the Dragon Age, lock them up or burn them at the stake, and sometimes it sort of lands between those two. But I kind of liked where it was, and I think Lucas made it, who is a very good student of history, made it right. It's this idea that it's a different thing to different people, but it's not just be astonished and terrified when it happens. Obviously, you meet Gurzil, you're terrified. But
Who wouldn't be?
I will also put this in. The reason for Gurzil and the Temple of Gurzil, as I've explained to Nico at one point, I think, when it came out in the Discord chat, was that Gurzil is actually part of the 6th century mythos. He existed. There was a temple of Gurzil in Libya, or was. it's part of the cult of Gurzil and Iona are all actual historical individuals. They were they were not like a nothing cult either. It took pretty much a pretty hard hit from the Byzantine imperial war machine to put them out of commission. They came very close. They had huge amounts of power. And it's one of those things that in many cases, I think we've forgotten is, okay, we're going to stop here for a second because Outlaw just has a very good comment. Yes, that is actually one of the truest points about Excalibur. Without it, and I think a lot of people miss that when they try to write something else, is that it is Excalibur that provides the kingship. And one of the things I certainly explained in the other one was that there was no plan in the 6th century as to how we're going to make kings. Nobody knows what we're going to do. Charlemagne has not, made the Holy Roman Empire and established this is the progression of, kings. So you kept coming up with different plans, like how are we going to declare people? And the Romans and the Byzantines sort of had a plan, but in the 6th century, that all went to hell because the emperor was a peasant that married a porn star and then took over the world. I am dead serious. You can't make that one up. He marries a porn star. Justinian marries a porn star, and then goes on to conquer the world with his buddy who marries the daughter of the demolition derby king. It's one of the most absurd stories in history, actually, and that was part of why. And yes, they're gonna pull Excalibur out of the sword when the next king shows up. Outlaw is talking. Yeah. Outlaw. The coronation stone is eventually going to make its way down from Scotland, where they have it locked in the monastery, and then the new king will sit on it when he gets crowned. So yeah, that actually, the idea of using a stone, it's still stuck around. It's one of these absurd, concepts, but it's still there.
Yeah, I will say this: your portrayal of Merlin is probably one of the most unique that I've come across in Arthurian legend. Because every time that I've seen things like Sword in the Stone and others, it's I always get this impression he's just this cool, awesome, good guy wizard. But I really kind of got a different vibe from your portrayal there, both in terms of the description.
I will be honest. I wish I could take full credit for my Merlin, but honestly, the character, there's a lot of portrayals of Merlin out there that are not Merlin. Gandalf obviously is a portrayal of Merlin. I liked and I didn't like how Brandon Cromwell did it in Warlord Chronicles. I thought his was a little bit closer with the Druid Merlin, sort of trying to reconstitute old magic. The character though that I loved as Merlin was actually Joe Abercrombie's character from the first Lost series, who I can't remember his name, but his sort of Merlin wizard character, I really liked. It's this sort of almost Machiavellian, almost a bad guy kind of wizard. That's he's not real. He has maybe some magic, but most of what he's doing is just manipulating the situation, which is frankly what Merlin does in the series.
Which I loved about that. I love the description. I love some aspects of his physical characteristics and how I don't know. Don't want to spoil anything, but you. Well, this is very light spoiler. I'll just say that now. But yours is the first portrayal of Merlin I've come across where he's one-handed.
Well, that was just a factor of me trying to make that scene feel as brutal as possible. I mean, I needed to do something evil to Merlin after what he was doing in that particular scene. It just something bad had to happen there. Um, I'm not going to spoil it. I won't tell. I won't spoil that
That's
scene.
that's hardly a spoiler.
Scene.
That's hardly a spoiler.
Oh, come on. No, it's not a spoiler because you didn't tell him how he lost his head.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
We're
that
not
is
going
an
to.
amazing chapter. I worked very hard on that chapter. I'm very proud of how that chapter came out. I can't wait to hear how my audiobook narrator pulls that off. Given, I think I sent you guys a sample of chapter 4 where, like, I'm in tears. I wrote this stuff, and I'm crying.
All right. Well, we'll do our best not to spoil things for you. So
Yeah, and I was going to say background because you mentioned it too, and yeah, I remember because we were chatting after I read the first book, and I had no idea that Gurzil was a real like character from history, basically, and like I recognized a lot more of it. And I'm not super well versed in all of the history from this time period, so learning about it was super interesting. But yeah, that was I really liked the combination and kind of how you mentioned too, like the people um, talking about Northern Africa and the Byzantines and drawing everything together around Gurzil and then your different interpretation of Gurzil. It's just something I really enjoyed. So goes along too with your comment that although book 2 focuses a lot more on the Arthurian part of the story, there are definitely elements in it in book 1, but I really liked how we're tying a lot more. So it's not just the Arthurian tales that are there, it's a much broader scale, I feel like, than what you usually get from that kind of thing. So that was something I really enjoyed about it. It's just the total weaving together of all these different elements around the core of Gurzil.
Right. And in later books, there's a lot, a lot of what I've been establishing here. Gurzil is really one of the only mystical elements that you see. We have a couple others. But as we move forward, one of the things I think that you need to do is, you got to build a magic system from the ground up. I think a lot of, especially self-published authors, make the mistake of trying to build, we're going to throw the idea of how the magic works at you, and then we're going to, go and just have that as sort of just this base stock toolkit. Like, here's your tool, almost like you signed in on a video game, and here's your stock tools. But even in a video game, you got to build the you don't want to be given all the powers at the beginning because then you just get overwhelmed. So there is a lot more going on the magical side of things that I've kind of alluded to in the first bit, where like Gozo wanted to get this all, as you said, things aren't going the way Gozo wanted it to go by the end of book 2. He wanted to get this all sort of sorted out without too much interference from the other mystical elements. And that's obviously failed, which you see by the end of book 2. Like, they're here, they know he's here, and they're curious and gonna be interfering and stuff.
So, what I'm curious to find out eventually is whether Gurzil succeeds in the end. But I guess we'll all have to wait and find out.
Gurzil's goals are complicated.
They are.
No. Gurzil has an end game. Getting Saba is his short-term goal. His long-term goal will make you wonder if Gurzil is actually the bad guy.
No, I've always loved the idea of a bad guy who's maybe not the bad guy, and the good guys maybe not the good guys. I've always loved that idea.
Well, that's something too, and I even just was commenting earlier today. Is I like especially book 1. There's a lot of shades of gray, but you feel like you kind of know. Okay, these are the good guys. These are the bad guys. Book 2 muddies the waters in a really interesting way too, and then kind of has some teases for things coming later where there seems to be more than we know about, and that things are more complex, and so it's as we find out more, there's still more of those questions to hook you and keep you interested. And so that's where I'm very interested to see where that goes. But I like the way that's handled, where it's not like it's just this is a good versus evil story. This is like there are some, relatively good, relatively bad. There's a lot of people in the middle, and some people may be better than they seem or worse than they seem, and it's kind of that mix where you don't fully know what to expect
Right.
because of that. So
Well, and it's kind of obviously it's kind of also a thing of it's a muddied kind of, it's these are not pretty wars, and no wars at this point. These wars have been going on for almost 100 years at this point. There's no war by that. Look at wars that have been going on for 5 years, 10 years. We have an idea of what that looks like in the 21st century. It isn't pretty, and really at that point, is anybody the good guy and anybody the bad guy? A lot of so especially with the Britons and even with the Africa and even in North Africa, you know, these characters had these characters aren't fighting their war; they're fighting their grandfather's wars in some cases. I mean, George was raised by basically in this war camp. Arthur as was, and they all grew up in this just you know chaos of trying to hold off the Saxons, or trying to put things together in the wake of the Roman withdrawal. And so it's just it is no I kind of there isn't really these are the Jedi and these are the Sith, and we're all going, and the Jedi do evil things, but when the no, sorry, the Sith are the evil guys, and when the Jedi do things like blow up a base with 2 million people on it, we cheer, yay, 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 war crimes, yay, genocide. It's like sometimes you kind of be a little bit. I didn't, you got to. I try to avoid that, Even
I don't know. I think the Jedi were the bad guys, honestly. I mean, come
when
on,
you
they
look at
denied
how
all
what the
emotions.
Jedi are
They,
doing. You genocide the Sith. The Sith spend 200 years trying to get back at you. You
at
got
least the Empire used battle droids, not people in war. I mean, come on.
I think the Separatists were the ones that used the battle droids, but I might be mistaken.
I
Um,
guess it depends on what point in the canon you're
but
reading.
there
But
is but I am trying to ask the question of, is brutality ever justified? And certainly George is the question there. You know, George does some things that we would, and I try not to get into the nitty gritty, but he does things that you would kind of consider this is not an okay, this isn't good guy tactics.
yeah,
You
well,
know,
yeah, I will say this: the kind of villain I can't stand is what I term the Disney villain. The villain that knows they're a villain, villain that does evil and knows they're doing evil and is doing evil for the sake of doing evil. I can't stand that kind of villain.
that's
I've always
Virgo.
Yeah, I've always liked the villain that inherently believes what they are doing is right, no matter how skewed, how bad that seems. They
Without,
believe inherently that they're in the right and that they're doing this for right causes. And I think those make the best villains overall. I'd love to hear both your viewpoints on that, and as far as what makes the best villain.
well, Nico, what do you think? You go first.
oh sure. So yeah, I think it's, and what it comes down to is with that is like when any character, especially it seems to be easier with villains, is just completely one dimensional and there's no depth. That's just going to be a lot more boring to read. And I feel like that's what you get with like the mustache twirling, like ha ha ha, type villains.
Exactly.
With that
Disney
type of
villain.
thing. Yeah, when there's really no like motivation, it's just they just like to be. Um, Evil, but I'm glad that's like okay, you need something more. So, it's having like you could have the believing that they're doing right, or just at least having strong motivations. I think as long as you're developing the villain, so they don't feel like a caricature, that definitely helps. And you could still have people who are evil people, but you want to build a little bit more to it as well. That I
Yeah.
like to see for sure.
certainly. When you say that, the character I always think of in my books would be Gunthus. Gunthus has real motivations. He has a reason for being who he is. At the same time, he is a really despicable character. Even Iona, who is just purely just nastiness. He has his reasons. They may not be reasons that we would consider justifiable, but they're not any worse than many other modern day politicians. He wants power. We can relate to his desire for power, and then we have other characters like Una that just have issues.
Yeah, that was definitely in both of these books. It's although not all the motivations are necessarily clear, as because things are still being revealed. You get that you see the motivations of the characters, you see where they're coming from, and it sets that up, and especially so even like the quote unquote good guys seem pretty morally gray as well, kind of like you said with George. He's presented as kind of like a good guy, but he's also done some very brutal things and probably will do more brutal things in the future. And so it's it definitely takes a more, I feel like, realistic and complex take on the characters, whether or not they're villains. It's just in general, it's a little bit more complex than just we have the brave, perfect hero and the just evil villain. It's a lot more nuanced. I found in the book so far.
One of the
It
things
definitely makes for a more entertaining read too, I find, when you
Yeah.
have that nuance and that grayness in there, for sure.
one of the things I always will point out is, it's like trying to watch, 1990 Star Trek. And we are in a military environment, but we're going to fly around the galaxy and encounter terrible foes, and never once will we compromise our moral compass, even slightly. And I think that was why a lot of people say that the Dark Lord trope is dead. I'll also say this, you gotta when it comes to a Dark Lord, there is a basic framework that you want to stick with, and it's you want to have your Dark Lord should be a Dark Lord. He should be just malevolent and nastiness, and he should have two underlings that are sort of competing. You got to have the Witch King and you got to have Saruman. You have Tolkien. You have Darth Vader. Just these sort of two despicable individuals that sort of prop you up like a pyramid. And when you make that sort of Dark Lord, you want to look at what scares you today. Like when Tolkien wrote, he was writing about the Nazis, and his terror was the Nazis and the Bismarck and the Soviet Union. These evil leaders that you don't really understand or see very much, hiding in giant towers, overseeing vast armies of drones. Today, that's not really what we have. We have scary people hiding behind the curtains, scary people hiding in caves with, fanatical followers and hired mercenaries that, go out and do their evil business.
Now it's a super smart AI that wants to take over the world.
I do not believe that. There will not be a super smart AI. I'll tell you why. I will tell you why, Telecoms Genius. You will not have a super smart AI take over the world because these super smart AIs spend their entire days trolling through cyberspace. Now, what is 99% of cyberspace? Pornography. You are worried about an entity that spends 99% of its time watching porn. It's going to take over the world. Yeah, we're terrified. Humans must exist. We need more.
As I say, that explains the bots in our chat today. Then,
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh yeah. The AI is coming for us. It wants more. I don't know if
man.
that's
Jeez,
coming.
I don't know what's up with that, but block immediately. Like, what the heck?
Like, what the hell is going on? I want to
yeah.
mention it. We got to mention it.
It happens sometimes on lives. You'll just get the random ones like
I
that.
know that.
So.
You see them pop up and then just disappear. Boom, boom.
Hey, look, if that's what people are interested in, you know what? You do you, but you
You
know
do
what? Keep
you.
it out of my live chat.
You go over there. This is the fantasy live chat with evil dragons. Nobody's coming
This
here
is
for that.
supposed to be a family-friendly channel.
Yes. Well, we failed that.
Yeah, it looks like Art agrees.
Oh,
Oh man.
I hope Art reads this book. I think Art will enjoy from
Well,
from everything I'm reading on this, Art. I believe you will enjoy Gurzil.
yeah, maybe he'll win the free audiobook.
Show it that way.
I was gonna say, yeah, I was. This
Hey,
really.
look, see him.
Yeah.
You can see the eyes.
I really the hardcover is so beautiful.
Oh, it
It's,
really is.
the paperback was nice, but it's just like the pop of the colors on this too.
Yeah,
So-
they took some doing.
So I gotta ask, how
Well, I have a
long did it take for you to? I guess how long were you wanting to write this book from like when you first conceived of starting to write to final publication? Like, what was that process like for you?
This particular book, this one.
Both, even like
You're
just the
gonna-
whole
you're gonna hate
concept.
me when I
of the
tell you
story.
this. From the first draft I wrote to publication was 9 months.
Wow, that's quick for a lot of people. For
Now,
sure.
here's what I'm going to tell you. This was not the first book I wrote. Nobody wants to read those ones.
See,
the
now
first
I
one
want to
I-
read them just because you said
No,
nobody
you
wants.
don't, because the first ones I wrote made Sanderson tomes look small. They were
Oh, I think
Oh,
you
I think
froze
you might
on
have
us. There.
froze. He really doesn't want us to know about those books.
Apparently not.
hello. I think I lost you.
Oh, there we are.
I
Now
think
you're
you're back
back.
now.
I
Yeah.
am back. Okay. No. So I don't know what's happened since I've been gone. The first ones I wrote were like just massive tomes, and I wrote a trilogy for those, and that's when I kind of realized slim it down. And then I started when my daughter was born. I went, and I think she was a little bit after that. We were watching, what was it? Some terrible Disney movie, Frog Princess. That was it. This is supposed to be the movie for the nice
I read that
with
Grimm's
the black,
fairy tale.
with the black princess, with the ethnic princess, and I'm gonna watch this with my lovely little daughter, and I'm like, I'm offended by this, so I go and I do the fine. We're gonna find a different princess thing, and I go, you know what? I happen to know from just being research and stuff that Princess Saba, the princess from St. George, was from Libya. No way she's blonde. Somebody's figured this one out, and nope. All the storybooks that you find blonde, blue-eyed, Germanic-looking princess. Okay, moving on. So I started writing a children's book, actually. And as I started doing my research for that, I started putting together sort of different historical pieces that I saw kind of fitting together in the framework that would become Gurzil. And the whole story got a lot darker and certainly didn't become anything that you read to a 1-year-old. But
I was going to say, I was very surprised when you said you started with the children's book and then got this. I was like, I would not have guessed that by any means. So
it started
really
with a
interesting.
children's book. It really did. And with just nice and happiness with an Arthurian knight that ends up in Africa and saves the princess. It was nice and cute. But finding all the history, it got bigger and it got darker and it became an actual. It was originally a standalone book, and then it became 10 books, this massive outline of chapters and various sort of written chapters through that ended up this rather epic movement through this dark age landscape. And as I found more characters, as I discovered the you say like it was weird that you didn't find Gurzil, and it's not weird at all. Nobody's heard of Gurzil. He's known. I'll say this, not true. I do know some people that might have heard of Gurzil. If you play Crusader Kings and you played in North Africa and you decided to be a witch, you will have heard the name. But he's not usually portrayed as a dragon. He's usually portrayed more as a minotaur-like character.
So I just want to quickly say, welcome, Epic. Glad you could join us. And
Oh,
everybody
Epic.
watching, Epic, you got to subscribe to Epic Tales too, because his channel literally is epic. He does some awesome animations. And trust me, it's worth the wait for his videos to come out. Trust me.
They actually, I watched a bunch of them, and they were actually really, really good because it keeps coming on with Drew here. And I'm always on the lookout for somebody that I can get to review my book. As they all know, that's probably the first thing I'll ever come to a booktuber with. Oh, I like your channel. Would you like to review my book? I watched 3 of your episodes. I liked it.
Totally. And yeah, thank you, by the way, because for the copies of your book, it's I never expected to actually receive books from authors to review when I started this channel.
It's still weird to me too. It's happened like a bunch of times now, and like it still just feels weird to me. It's really cool, and it's amazing, but I get you there. But
yeah,
I was gonna
it's
joke
awesome,
because you said the old books were tomes, and I mean like short books are nice, but like if we compare the other book I'm reading to both,
Yeah. But again, you could, in many ways, you could make the argument that Badon Hill and Gurzil could really easily have been one book. Unfortunately, as a self-published author, if I try to sell people tomes, they don't read them and they don't review them. The reason that everybody on BookTube has heard about Gurzil is that it got a number of people to read it, not because it was this wonderful hype book or because it has a great cover, which it does. It has an awesome cover.
Yes, it does.
Because it's short and they could fit it into these TBRs, and almost by accident, I think I came out about the same time that everybody started reviewing Illborn and like the Sanderson books. And a lot of booktubers at that time actually gave me reviews because they needed something short that they could call interesting enough to fill their content, because it took them, it was going to take them a month to read the new Sanderson book, or the new Sanderson books had been announced, and so they decided they were going to go and read it. And Wheel of Time had just come out. Sometimes, and frankly, a lot of them I had a few people that came back to me and said that they'd been reading Wheel of Time and then needed something to put in their TBR because they'd stopped reading Wheel of Time.
So there you go. There's a
how
pro
dare
tip.
they stop reading Wheel of Time?
Yeah. Pro tip to self-published authors: if you want your book to be reviewed on BookTube, make your first few books short. Get everybody interested and excitement going. So then you could really put out a tome, and people will want to go for it because you're already known.
No, hold on. To self-published authors out there, I am going to tell you this one: you need to make your books short. And here's the reason why. Books are sold by the book. Editors charge by the word count. So
Also fair.
your cost is how big your book is. That's how much it costs to make the book. Now, you can't sell your book for more than $2.99. You are a self-published author. You can't charge $10 for your book. Guess what? Nobody will read it. Even your mother and people that love you will wonder about that. So if you're gonna be a self-published author, you don't want to just come out with these giant books. They cost a lot to ship. They cost a lot to print. The out copy alone is going to cost you a fortune. The proof copy is going to cost you. So you want smaller books. You want to see if you can split. Like I said, Gurzil and Badon Hill could easily be considered one novel. But
I'll be right. Sorry, guys. I'll be right back. My battery's getting low. Got to get my plug before it drops. You two keep chatting.
Works, but
well,
yeah, I definitely agree.
We got a minute here, though. We're gonna go, and I wanna. There was one comment from Out Lois. Have you thought about doing a book about today's world and two of the most powerful evil overlords? The answer, I will argue that I have. But I will say no, I will not be writing that book. And I think some people that have talked to me on Discord and some people that have certainly read the book will understand to some degree my reasons for that. And it's part of why I'm anonymous. That if I write that book, satellites are going to link up in outer space, and men in the black helicopters are going to come looking for me. I don't need to write anything that will attract that kind of attention from those kind of individuals. It's just my career, and my past career was one in which I was privy to information that I don't need to get more than most people would have. So we're not going to have that conversation.
All right. Save the day before my battery died. Yay.
Hey, you made it. Yeah. But yeah, definitely having some shorter books work. And I mean, that was exactly what happened. Because when you approached me about Gurzil, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can fit another book in. And you told me it's pretty short. And I got this, like, I can definitely fit this in. And it was the same thing with Badon Hill. I was able to get to this pretty quick because I had a bunch of other things I was reading. But it's nice. They have that kind of almost episodic feel where a lot's happening. We get to an ending. It's not like a complete ending because it's obviously a continuing story, but it is so nice to have some short books. And I love my long books too. I read a ton of their huge, big, long stories, and I love a lot of them, but it's just so nice to break it up with some short books. So it definitely worked for me to get me to review it. And I'm really glad I did, obviously. So,
right. But again, the other fact is that you need, the other point I'm going to make here is that if you're self-publishing, one of the things you have to do is, if you want to be at all successful, is you have to not look self-published. Not because self-publishing is bad or because people don't want to read self-published books. It's that if your book looks self-published, nobody's going to, they're going to assume that you are basically treating KDP like a Wattpad. And that's not what KDP should be used for. If you're going to put a book on KDP, you needed to put in you needed to put in some funding and some money and some time. I mean, and it's not as much as everybody says. There's a lot of author tubers out there that make it sound like you need to spend money on this massive number of people and basically build this huge team. The fact of the matter is that you don't. What you probably do need is, you're going to need a professional editor. If it's your first time, you probably need a proofreader. But guess what? Even if you're going to traditionally publish your first novel, you want to do that anyway. don't make my mistake, because that is why I self-published. I had Gurzil, I shot Gurzil out into the world, into the agencies, and it wasn't ready yet. Not because it was a bad book, it just hadn't been polished up. It had too much, the info dumps were a little bit too long, and it just hadn't been cut apart. And so what happens then is there's not as many of those agents as you would think. So once you've put the book out to an agency, you don't get to go back and try again. Don't care what people say. You're not the exception. You're always going to, don't be, sure, you can always find the exception. But those exceptions usually have some other exceptional story to them. They worked for somebody, they knew somebody, they were the translator for that group. So I'm going to be very honest, because I seem to see that there's people taking notes now. What you want to do is you want to go straight to Reedsy, and you want to get and hire a publisher. And the only reason I say Reedsy is because there are so many scammers. You write a book, the first thing you're going to get, let me put it this way. If you put out your book and you go even so much as Google how to publish a book or file a copyright, it will look like you will feel like you have just filled out the thing in like a lending tree, because suddenly you're just inundated. They are all calling you. We will publish your book. We want to publish your book. And many, many people fall for that. And sadly, that's what kills a lot of very good books, because they get taken once and then they're just done with the whole game. And it doesn't take getting, if you lose, and many times they get a lot of money out of these people. They get $500,000 out of some people, sometimes more. And then they go and they try to get that money back, and only to discover that they can't, because technically they did exactly what the Vanity Press told them they were going to promise to do. They did it. They published your book. They took it. They threw up some basically Adobe cover art, free source image up on your cover. They plopped it onto KDP. Oh, and they probably copyrighted under their own company's domain. So you probably have to pay them if you want the rights back after all that's done. And it's brutal. So Reedsy at least is the best bad option. They're expensive, but the actual site monitors it to make sure that your editor is actually doing what they said and has the qualifications they say they have, and they vet that. And they're not that bad. And so one of the other things I'm going to say here is that if you're going to traditionally publish, you want to do that. You want to go through the end. If any self-publishing author tells you that they're self-publishing from choice, tell them that they have rocks in their heads, because this is not an easy run. And it's hard enough, especially if you're writing a series. A lot of people don't want to read a series that isn't complete. There's been too many, especially in the self-publishing world, is more notorious for it than others, just because self-publishing is expensive and the rewards are never what you fantasize of when you first start out. You first start out, you think, I'm going to be a bestseller, I'm going to be the next Raven Song. And then you're not. Or, just those days of being able to self-publish something and be a star are sadly over. And some of that's good and some of that's bad. But until the algorithms get fixed, there is no way for the algorithm to tell what is a good self-published novel and what isn't. So it's all just a mess. And unless you can afford for someone with the social media magic wand to go bippity boppity boo, you're a bestseller, you're not going to do that. And even, let's face it, how many booktube videos are there out there of overhyped books that weren't that good? You've all made that video, and rightly so. You should not be able to bippity boppity boo a book into, and you can't, as much as you might throw everything on it, you're not gonna make what was it, the High Republic book. They're just not that good. They're not Darth Bane series.
Could I just say, as far as overhyped books, and this might be a hot take for a lot, but I honestly find Joe Abercrombie to be overhyped.
That's
I mean,
immediately.
I like him. I like Joe Abercrombie, but with the hype he's got, I'm like, I cannot see how this book is loved as much as the hype implies.
I literally have an older video called "First Law is Overrated."
Yes, but actually, they didn't put a lot of hype on First Law, though. First Law did not receive a lot of hype when it came out. What received the hype were the 3 books that he put out after that. Best Served Cold, Red Country, and Heroes. They received loads of hype. But the First Law series was a nothing thing. Harry Potter only received hype after she put out the 3rd book. The first 2 books got almost nothing. So,
yeah, it's First Law definitely blew up kind of later, and then everybody was like, "It's the most amazing thing."
right.
The 3 books after it were better. Still not really my thing, but better for the most part for me. But
I've still got Joe Abercrombie on my TBR pile. I'll get to the other books eventually.
I finally finished the first 6 because I read Red Country.
I have not gotten to the other ones, but I have read the first. I read the first trilogy, and I love that. But then there are underrated books as well that received some hype, but probably should have received more, in my opinion. Like The Wounded Man.
Yes.
Demon
Cycle underhyped. I agree.
I literally have an underhyped video that includes that. Yep.
I know you do. I'm well aware. I commented on it, if you remember.
Oh, that was such a long time ago. I must have forgotten.
It was a long time ago. I think it was like back. But
Demon Cycle's on my reread list.
And obviously, anybody who has read my book realizes that obviously Wounded Man had a lot, and I've forgotten the author's name, and I should know this author.
Peter V. Brett.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, certainly Wounded Man, maybe not the other ones. It got a little dark in the second book, but it really, there are those books that just, if they'd received more hype, probably would have been, New York Times top bestsellers. Yep, right there. Then there are books like, I'm trying to think of one. Then there are books that deserve their hype. Certainly the Dresden File books, at least the early ones, were certainly worth everything, all the hype they got. And, once you've made your series, you've made a series. But that'll be the other thing I'll point out to people who are writing. Always have a sequel ready to go before you actually start this process. Before you actually go out and publish your book, have a sequel that will be out in about that you believe you can publish in about 6 months. And then have a plan and have a good outline done for the 3rd book and the 4th book. Because the point we just said here was, Joe Abercrombie didn't blow up until his later books. Same with Harry Potter, and even things like Dresden Files wasn't very popular until you got to book 2, 3, 4, 5. You gotta just have the only effective promotion you can do is to have sequels, to have people wanting to read the next one. Because
Good too to capitalize. I'm sure. Like if you get some attention, you can be like, "Hey, the next one's coming out really soon."
Yeah,
well, that
exactly.
helped as well with mine because by the time most of the reviews were even coming out, and most people had actually read it, I already had the release date, the cover art, and everything ready to go for the next book. And I'm a little bit slower just because life got away from me on getting the next one. Of course, then there comes the problem of then I decided to change my series up a bit, and it was just too good, and it had to get adapted because and I blame Drew for that. It was all Drew's fault.
Oh, all right.
It was all Drew's fault. Drew made me reread Lovecraft, and I had to involve that. So
You're welcome.
I read Lovecraft as a
It's a
buddy
good
read with Drew.
it's a good lead into because I wanted to ask you, with the whole Wars of Wrath series and Gurzil, are there any fantasy or authors' writing styles that's provided inspiration for your story? Perhaps some elements that got worked in because you're inspired by other works by other authors.
All right. I will point to we'll go down the list. Obviously, the early authors were major inspiration. I've read many of their works, Gawain and the Green Knight, Beowulf, which are both those works are a large reason why I chose the name I chose. The other books that I would say have greatly inspired me over the years would be certainly the Dune books were major inspiration. Not just the Frank Herbert Dune books, but the his sons. And I know everybody hates on those ones, but I enjoy them.
As
People
do I.
hate on them; they hate on them all the time. But that's actually in a large part where I got the idea of putting in those quotes at the beginning, because that's something that he does.
I
He
love
takes
that about it.
and so originally I had like one quote at the beginning, and then I ended up with with all these quotes, and I'm like, I can't pick, and I'm like, I almost have like 15 quotes. I'm trying to choose which one, what chapter was most important. Is it the one from the Aeneid? Is it the one from Gildas? And eventually, I just say, you know what? We're gonna see if we can find a quote for each one of these chapters, and we're just gonna plug it in. And sometimes it's very hard to find those quotes, and some of those quotes have come from the other place that you see that is, I want to say like medieval Total War and places like that often have those quotes in like the loading screens. So I kind of saw it that way, and that's one of the big. And I think that putting in the quotes, that was a revolution to my writing style. It allowed me to write the chapters a lot shorter. I didn't have to go into how this was historically accurate or in any way justify my historical accuracy. I'm taking it straight from the contemporary source.
I was actually specifically going to ask about that because, yeah, I thought that worked so well because it was a really good way to avoid info dumping. And I know you said in earlier versions you had kind of more info dumping, but instead you get a short quote that kind of puts what's about to happen or like what's going on at this time period into a quick context, and then you kind of go from there. And so that's yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That was one of my questions I was planning on getting to, because I really, really enjoyed the way that worked with some of those quotes. Just some of them, especially too, almost like there were a couple where it kind of tells you what's going to happen in the chapter, and you're like, oh, how is that going to happen in this chapter?
Yeah, but those ones that I do that, they don't happen exactly how I tell them. It's how they would have been recorded, how the people that lived through this went back and said that happened. And you realize that from like certainly the quote you're thinking of, and we won't bring it up because
I was gonna say it's too spoilery, and I can't.
that
And
one
yeah,
is a
I know you know the one
spoiler,
I'm talking
and I
about.
know what you're talking about. I know the character you're talking about, and yeah, you do that one, and you go, if I, if this happened, this wouldn't have been recorded in this way because he was dead, and so the people that survived would have recorded it in a way that made them look not incompetent, and and would have fixed that. And in a lot of ways, that's actually one of the interesting things you find about this when you read these books is that in many cases these weren't written by the victors. These were written by people that that were either trying to make themselves look good, trying to avoid absolute execution, or in the case of some of the copious works, you really believe that this guy was basically had a big ass. When you read the secret history and what it is, he had a big ass file sitting in a of this little like quirky little book that he could hand out to his friend to people and say, "Of my death or disappearance, release this." So that and you almost think of it almost like I'm sure Bloomberg has a similar book on Hillary Clinton, and she too will have done things in that book. So was Theodora this bad, or were they just trying to make them look this evil? And the fact of the matter is, you can just take that and work with it. You can adjust it. You can make it your own, and look at how they probably would have done it in reality. And we live in an age of fake news where regular newscasters do that. So I have no objection to it.
Well, I will say this. I hope you keep up with the quotes at the beginning of each chapter,
No
uh,
worries. I
because
know that it
I
feels like
love that intro to
I
each
don't know.
chapter.
I know that it feels like you're gonna revenge. Like in 9 books, you're obviously gonna run out of quotes. The answer is no, no, because as I move forward, I still have source documents for everything. So as long as I keep to the history, I still have enough quotes to cover myself. And
Fantastic.
then for those periods where you have chapters that don't have that sort of aspect to them, that don't have that easy grab that piece of history and plop it in there. Um, I have all of history to draw from, and
That's a lot of history.
and in the next book I even get more because I could add Sun Tzu quotes in the next book because I end up with a Chinese strategist. I won't tell you how I end up with him, but he ends up there, and I have wonderful ways of putting him in, and he's a good character that's evolving pretty well. But again, there's lots of history as Nico points out. I have a quote from General Mattis in there, which is probably the quote that just summarizes all of modern warfare. And actually, I will say, when I read it, I'm like, this is the only way you can write a battle scene. You can write any battle scene you want as long as you can show battle synergy. Think about it. You can have anything happen. It can be the most uneven battle in history. You can have your enemy can have, legions of stormtroopers and Death Stars and a whole fleet, and you can have 5 rebels in the teddy bear people army. And as long as you show battle synergy and they seem not to have it, you can win and we'll still believe it.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that is a good place to move on to our draw for free Gurzil book.
Nice.
Also, keep in mind that the next book is coming, and you're going to want to read it after reading the first two in this series. So
Well, the audiobook is coming too.
yes, yes. Let's do the draw here as we wrap up. So I've got a wheel of names, which everybody who has shown up in the chat has had the name placed onto the wheel. So let's get this done. So we've got Art, Leanne, who's Corey Hames, forever there. Jason Cross reads books, Epic Tales, Liam's Lyceum, and Bookish Chas. So let's see who's going to win the free copy of Gurzil audiobooks. So if your name wins, then what you need to do is you just message me on the Discord, direct message me over Twitter or on Instagram, and I'll send you the code to download the free copy of Gurzil audiobooks. So let's spin the wheel and see who wins. Yay, congratulations, Epic Tales. You are our winner. Woo! Fantastic. I'll be sure, I'm already connected with you on social, so I'll be sure to drop you the free audiobook code after the stream is done. Congratulations, Epic. I'm so glad that you won that.
I hope
It's
you enjoy
awesome,
it.
and I know you're going to enjoy it. Absolutely. With that in mind, thank you so much, everybody, for joining me on the stream, for joining us in the chat. Make sure that you like, comment, subscribe, share this out with your friends and family, and subscribe to Nico as well, because Nico has an awesome channel. I wish I could say I could get to every one of your videos, but there's not enough time in the day to get to everything, for sure.
Oh, I get
And
that.
thank you, Anonymous, so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. Lo, it was awesome talking with you.
Get
I was talking with everybody else here. I just love talking about my book, if you haven't noticed.
Absolutely. Go and get these books. They are so worth it. And there's going to be more. So go check that out. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a fantastic conversation. And, as I like to say, before we sign off, any last thoughts, Nico? Any last thoughts, Nico or Anonymous?
No.
I think in a roundabout way, I got to most of the things I wanted to talk about.
Oh, come on, you must have one question. We have 5 minutes left. What do we got?
Let's see. I'm looking at. I made like a rough list. Oh, so the one really obvious thing that we never directly talked about, I suppose, is the Anonymous name. And I know you kind of talked a little bit about it, how you picked it based on some other anonymous stories. And I know you mentioned as well in a past interview that part of it too is just that it feels like nobody really owns this kind of story. And then I really enjoyed the introductions too, where it's like the anonymous person is like the narrator, which makes sense with what you said as well. So with that, I was going to ask, like, kind of how did that evolve, and would you ever consider writing something else under
where
a different
that
name?
came from? When I actually decided to do it, it came from I was reading Soci, which is a retelling of the Odyssey, which is a very good book for anybody who wants one. And in that one, it said, Odysseus's fall was because he couldn't be nobody. He had to be someone. So he yells out to the Cyclops at the end and gets himself doomed. And I had that moment.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So I had that moment where I'm like, I could be someone, and I was having trouble writing at the time because some of it felt too political and some of it felt a little bit too rough. And I felt like I had to tone that down. And then I kind of decided that no, I don't need to do that. I don't need my name. I don't need to own this. I need the book. I want the book to be read. I don't need to be famous. I don't need to, put myself in that position. I can be anonymous, and nobody will ever have any clue as to who I am. And then the I in front of it came from the fact that I could never, that all the social media handles called anonymous were already taken.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you for tuning in. And, and until next time, keep on reading.
Thank you, guys.
Right. Bye.